Imagine you are a toy tin soldier. You're just sitting on a shelf made entirely of this cold painted metal.
Right. Completely rigid, lifeless.
Exactly. And then one day, someone reaches down and tries to perform a miracle. They basically want to turn you into a real flesh and blood human being.
Yeah, which, sounds like an incredible upgrade.
You'd think you would be absolutely thrilled, but the reality, you'd be terrified. I mean, you don't know what flesh is at all.
No, all you know is your tin.
Right. And as that tin begins to soften and melt and transform, you wouldn't think you were being upgraded. You would think you were being destroyed.
It's a really intense image, that almost violent resistance to spiritual transformation.
It really is. And that resistance is exactly what we're unpacking today. But before we get into the weeds of all that, welcome to the deep dive. And may God bless your day today. It is really great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's a fascinating topic we have lined up.
For sure. For this deep dive, we are pulling our insights from a really compelling piece of source material. It's Book 4, written by the renowned author C.S. Lewis.
And this specific book explores the concepts beyond personality, right? The architecture of the universe, really.
Yeah, and the first foundational steps into the doctrine of the Trinity. Our mission today is to look at theology through a completely different lens.
Because a lot of people, and maybe even you listening right now, hear the word theology and immediately picture, I don't know, dry, dusty academic theories.
Oh, absolutely. Debated by people who haven't seen the sun in weeks. But Lewis presents theology as something intensely practical.
Right. He frames it as a roadmap, a literal survival guide.
Exactly. A guide designed to explain how a human being transforms from a mere biological creature into something spiritually alive.
And Lewis actually anticipates that exact skepticism about theology being dry. He shares a story about an old, hardened military officer he once met.
Oh, yeah. The guy in the desert.
Yes. This officer essentially told him, I don't need your dogmas or your religious formulas. I've been out in the desert at night, alone under the stars.
And he felt God out there.
Right. He said he felt the tremendous, overwhelming mystery of God. And that experience was real to him, so theological textbooks were just, pedantic, unreal nonsense.
And the brilliant move Lewis makes here is that he doesn't argue with the guy's experience at all. He totally agrees.
Yeah, he says that feeling the presence of God in the desert is entirely real.
But then he introduces an analogy that completely reorients the whole conversation. He says having that mystical feeling in the desert is like standing on the beach and looking at the Atlantic Ocean.
The ocean is real. The salt spray is wet. The crashing sound is authentic.
But theology is merely a map of the Atlantic Ocean.
Which, if you think about it, transitioning from staring at the actual ocean to looking at a map on a table, well, it feels like a downgrade.
Totally. You're turning away from the magnificent rolling water to stare at a flat, colored piece of paper.
But that colored piece of paper is based on the combined, tested experiences of hundreds of thousands of navigators.
People who have actually sailed across that exact ocean. So, if your only goal is to take a romantic walk on the beach and have a feeling of awe, you don't need the map.
Right, you could just look at the waves and be happy.
But if you actually want to get somewhere, say you want to build a ship and cross the Atlantic to reach another continent, you absolutely need that piece of paper.
Because you can't navigate a massive voyage on just a feeling. The feeling doesn't do the work, the map does.
I love that. So to even begin using this theological map, we have to understand the fundamental terrain.
And Lewis argues that the very first step in reading this map is grasping the profound difference between two specific verbs, to make and to beget.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on the surface, it sounds like an argument over dictionary definitions.
It does, but it's actually the hinge for his entire view of the universe.
So making means creating something that is fundamentally different from yourself. Like when a beaver chews down trees and builds a dam, it makes a dam.
Or when a human chisels a block of marble, they make a statue. The creator and the creation do not share the same nature.
Right. But begetting is entirely different. Begetting means producing something of the exact same kind as yourself.
Like a bird begets an egg that becomes a bird, a human begets a human baby, the offspring shares the nature of the parent.
Therefore, applying this logically to the architect of the universe, what God begets must be God. But what God makes is not God.
Exactly. So humanity falls squarely into the made category. We are the statues in this scenario.
We were made by God, not begotten by him. And because we are made, we possess a specific type of life.
Lewis uses the Greek word bios to describe it, biological life, the kind of life that comes through nature.
And BIOS is incredibly fragile, right? It's really high maintenance.
Oh, very. It's a life sustained by a constant influx of external resources. If you stop giving your bios oxygen, water, or food, it immediately decays.
It eventually dies. It's entirely dependent on its environment.
But God, conversely, possesses what the Greeks called Zoe spiritual life.
And Zoe is uncreated, eternal, and self-sustaining. It doesn't need external fuel because it is the source of its own existence.
Right. We use the English word life for both of them, which creates a lot of confusion.
It really does. It's like comparing a photograph of a beautiful, towering mountain to the actual physical mountain itself.
They share a resemblance, sure. But one is a flat piece of paper you can fold in your pocket, and the other is a million tons of granite.
Which raises a massive question for me. If we are just these biological statues running on high-maintenance bios, is the end goal of Christianity simply to be a good statue?
That assumption is precisely where so many people get stuck. They view religion as just a collection of behavioral modifications.
Like a list of rules telling you how to be a nicer, more polite statue.
Exactly. But Lewis points out a glaring flaw in that logic. If Christianity is merely good moral advice, it's completely redundant.
Because humanity has had access to brilliant moral advice from Plato, Aristotle, Confucius for millennia.
We know the rules. The problem is that we are completely incapable of following them.
Yeah, we are remarkably bad at taking good advice. So if it's not a self-help program for statues, what is it?
Lewis clarifies that it isn't about giving advice at all. It is the rumor that the statues in the great sculptor's shop are going to wake up.
Oh, wow. They are going to draw breath and actually come to life.
Yes. The roadmap is about a biological creature essentially upgrading dimensions to inherit a completely different spiritual kind of life.
Upgrading dimensions. That is such a fascinating way to look at it.
It is, and it's necessary.
Yeah.
Because if our goal is to step into this higher Zoe life, we have an immediate sensory problem.
Right. We literally lack the biological equipment to comprehend the multidimensional being we are trying to connect with. We're trying to understand a complex God using our simple human logic.
And Lewis uses this dimensional geometry analogy that really helped this click for me.
Me too. The geometry analogy is essential for grasping the mechanics of this upgrade. Let's break it down.
Sure. Imagine a one-dimensional world. It's just a straight line.
In 1D, the rules are incredibly simple. One person equals one being. That's it.
Now, move up to 2 dimensions. Suddenly, you can take those straight lines and combine them in ways a 1D person couldn't even fathom.
You connect them at right angles to make a flat square.
Right. Then you upgrade again to 3 dimensions. You take 6 of those flat squares, and you fold them together to make one solid cube.
And notice the pattern here. As you move up to higher, more complex dimensions, you don't throw away the old shapes.
No, you combine them in totally new, mind-bending ways.
So when we apply that geometric progression to theology, it gives us a framework for the Christian doctrine of the Trinity.
On our basic human biological level, the rule is simple. One person is one being.
But as you advance into God's higher, vastly more complex spiritual dimension, the geometry changes.
You find a being who is 3 distinct persons while remaining one single being.
Just as a 3D cube is 6 distinct squares, while remaining one solid, cohesive body.
Exactly. It's not 3 separate gods standing in a row, and it's not one single person rapidly switching between 3 different masks.
It's a completely different dimension of existence that our 1D brains really struggle to picture. But Lewis doesn't leave this as some abstract math problem floating in space, does he?
No, he brings this cosmic geometry right down into your ordinary bedroom.
Consider the deeply practical example of an ordinary person kneeling down on their bedroom floor to pray.
According to this multidimensional roadmap, the entire Trinity is actively operating in that mundane moment.
God the Father is the destination, the goal you are praying to.
But God is also the motive power, the internal spiritual prompting that is actively pushing you to kneel down and pray in the first place. That's God the Holy Spirit.
Furthermore, God is the bridge, the very road you walk along to reach the destination. That is God the Son.
So the entire threefold life of this multidimensional being is fully engaged, pulling you into that Zoe life.
All while you are just staring at your carpet trying to find the right words. It's a dynamic, active process.
But learning how to engage with this process requires specific tools. Lewis makes a brilliant observation about the laboratory equipment required for theology.
Right, because the methodology has to match the subject. If you want to study geology, Your laboratory equipment is a rock hammer and a magnifying glass.
You look at rocks, rocks don't move, they don't hide, and you hold all the initiative.
If you study zoology, the animals might run away, so your equipment includes stealth and observation
But if
blinds.
you want to know a person, the dynamic shifts completely. They have to actively choose to reveal themselves to you.
Yeah, you can't force a relationship with a microscope. And when the person you are trying to know is a multidimensional, three-personal God.
A single human being sitting alone in a room with a book just isn't enough.
Lewis argues that God can only show himself clearly through a specific, clean instrument.
Just like an astronomer needs a telescope with perfectly aligned mirrors to see a distant galaxy, the instrument for seeing God is the united Christian community acting together.
It makes perfect logical sense when you tie it back to the geometry, really. A single, isolated biological unit, one person, cannot adequately reflect a communal, three-personal spiritual being.
It requires an interconnected community operating in love and unity to act as the lens.
You need the whole orchestra to play a symphony, not just one guy with a flute claiming he understands the entire composition better than everyone else.
Absolutely.
But thinking about all these believers forming this massive global community acting together, it brings up a huge logistical hurdle.
What's that?
How is this multidimensional God actually interacting with millions of people at the exact same time? I hear this frustration a lot from you listening.
The question of time. How can God possibly listen to millions of overlapping prayers at the exact same split second? It sounds chaotic.
Right. But Lewis introduces an analogy of a novelist that completely reframes how we think about time.
The novelist analogy is critical because it forces us to separate our biological experience of time from God's spiritual reality.
Let's say you are writing a novel. You write the sentence, Mary stopped working. She heard a knock at the door.
Now, inside the universe of the story, in Mary's timeline, there is zero time between her stopping her work and hearing that knock. It happens instantly.
But you, the author sitting at your desk, you aren't bound by Mary's timeline at all.
You could write, Mary stopped working, put your pen down, go make a cup of tea, stare out the window for 3 hours thinking about Mary's underlying motivations.
And then sit back down and write, she heard a knock.
The author has an unlimited amount of their own time to consider a split second of the character's life.
Lewis expands on this mechanism to explain that God doesn't exist in time at all. Time is a biological constraint.
God is not moving along the timeline with us, rushing to keep up with the present moment. If time is a straight line drawn from left to right on a piece of paper, God is the entire page.
He's the paper itself. So when a pilot whose plane is crashing shoots up a desperate split-second prayer at exactly 10:30 p.m.,
God doesn't have to somehow squeeze his infinite attention into that tiny fragment of 10:30 p.m.
right, he has all of eternity to listen to that one specific prayer. To God, every moment from the Big Bang to the end of the universe is simply now.
The concept of an eternal now is incredibly comforting regarding prayer, but it introduces a significant philosophical dilemma regarding human agency.
Yes, and this is where I really have to push back because this trips up so many people.
The free will issue.
Exactly. If God is outside of time and he is looking at the whole page all at once, that means he already knows what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Right.
And if he already knows exactly what choice I'm going to make tomorrow, how do I actually have free will? Aren't I just an actor reading a script that's already been finalized?
It's the classic paradox of divine foreknowledge. But Lewis resolves it by pointing out a flaw in our vocabulary.
What's the flaw?
The mistake is using the word foresees. God doesn't foresee your future from the present. He doesn't have a crystal ball.
Because he is outside of time, tomorrow is already now for him. So he isn't predicting it.
Correct. He simply sees you doing it.
Yeah.
Let's look at the mechanism of observation. You are choosing to sit here and have this conversation with me right now, in the present, and I see you doing it.
Right.
Does my observing your actions right now strip you of your free will to do them?
Well, no. I'm actively choosing to speak. Your watching me doesn't force me to speak.
Precisely. So apply that to God. God simply observes your future as his present.
You are still making the free, uncoerced choice in that moment. It's just that God is already standing in that moment observing it.
His eternal perspective doesn't negate your temporal freedom.
Okay, that shifts the paradigm completely. If God exists in this eternal now, untouched by the flow of time, that fundamentally changes how we view the relationship within the Trinity itself.
Specifically, the relationship between the Father and the Son, which Lewis identifies as the actual engine generating this Zoe life.
Right, because when time is removed from the equation, cause and effect operate very differently. Here's where it gets really interesting.
The stacked books analogy.
Yes, to explain this, Lewis uses the analogy of two stacked books. Imagine a table, book A is lying flat on the table, and book B is stacked right on top of it.
Book A is clearly the cause of Book B's position. Book B is elevated exactly 2 inches off the table because Book A is holding it up.
Book A is the cause, book B is the effect. But what if those two books had just been sitting in that exact position for all eternity?
If they have been stacked eternally, there was never a moment where Book A existed before Book B. They exist simultaneously.
This demonstrates that you can have a direct cause and an effect without the cause having to precede the effect chronologically.
It's like a lamp and the light it gives off. You don't turn on a lamp, wait 5 minutes, then the light finally shows up.
Right. The lamp causes the light, but they happen together, and Lewis uses this to explain how God the Father can eternally beget God the Son.
The Father is the eternal cause, the Son is the eternal effect, but there was never a time when the Father was just hanging out alone before the Son existed.
The implication of the simultaneous eternal existence is profound, particularly when examining the phrase God is love.
We see that phrase everywhere, but Lewis argues it is meaningless if God was a single, isolated person who existed all by himself before creating the universe.
Because love, by its very definition, requires an object. It requires at least two persons. If you're alone, who are you loving? Yourself.
That's just narcissism, not love.
Exactly. Therefore, the Christian claim that God is love inherently means that love has been actively functioning as a dynamic relationship within God from all eternity.
The pulsing, infinite exchange of love between the Father and the Son is so intensely real, so unimaginably potent, that this relationship actually produces a third person, the Holy Spirit.
Lewis dares to describe this eternal dynamic exchange as a literal dance.
A divine dance. It shatters the boring stereotype of God as just an old man sitting statically on a cloud.
It's a pulsing engine of eternal creative love. But this brings us to the ultimate application for you, the listener.
Right. How does this affect us?
If this incredible Zoe life is a pulsing dance, how do we get in on it?
Lewis introduces the mechanism of good infection. You cannot simply be handed Zoe life like a diploma at graduation. It is a spiritual reality that must be caught.
If you want to get warm, you have to physically move your body close to the fire. If you want to get wet, you have to jump into the water.
You have to expose yourself to the carrier.
Yes.
You must get close to Christ, who is the physical carrier of this Zoe life, to catch the good infection.
But that circles us all the way back to our tin soldier at the beginning.
Ah, yes, the resistance.
Right. If catching this divine life brings eternal joy and allows us to join the cosmic dance, why do we resist it so aggressively? Why does our biological bios fight the infection tooth and nail?
Our bios resists because it is inherently self-centered and deeply invested in its own preservation.
It wants to be pampered. It wants to be the center of its own tiny universe.
And most importantly, it wants to be left alone in the dark. It fears the intense light of Zoe.
Because the tin soldier doesn't understand flesh. He only knows his tin, and as the tin melts, he thinks he is being murdered.
Our natural bios reacts the exact same way to spiritual growth. When the Zoe life starts to enter us, it feels incredibly uncomfortable.
It feels like our natural desires, our pride, and our self-centered habits are being actively killed. And so we fight the very process that is trying to wake us up.
The genius of the roadmap is how it solves the tin soldier's dilemma. The Son of God actually became a human. He willingly became a tin soldier.
He took on biological flesh to perfectly undergo the killing of these natural self-centered desires.
He allowed his tin to be completely melted down, facing poverty, mockery, betrayal, and a torturous death, so that the true, splendid spiritual life could finally break through and wake up.
He acted as the first truly real man. So what does this all mean for the mechanics of our salvation?
How does one man doing this in the Middle East 2 millennia ago actually transmit that upgrade to you or me right now?
Yes, that's the big question.
This requires us to completely dismantle our modern, Western view of humanity. We are culturally conditioned to view humanity as a massive collection of isolated dots.
You are a dot, I am a dot. We are all completely separate entities.
But Lewis argues that this is a biological illusion caused by our limited perception of time.
If you could step outside of time and view humanity from God's eternal perspective, you wouldn't see isolated dots at all.
You would see that humanity is one massive, deeply interconnected organism. We are a single, sprawling human tree sharing the same root system.
We are all branches on the same tree. So when Christ became a human, he didn't just appear as an isolated dot hovering in space.
He grafted himself into the human tree. He dropped the good infection of Zoe directly into the shared root system of the organism.
The heavy lifting has fundamentally already been done. The Zoe has descended into the human network.
The task now is for individual branches to willingly draw that sap into themselves.
It is a stunning visual, but Lewis is careful to nuance this. Recognizing our deep connection to this massive human tree shouldn't erase our individuality.
We aren't just a million identical carbon copy leaves. We are different organs functioning within the same body.
A lung operates very differently from a kidney, but they are both animated by the exact same blood.
Balancing that tension between unity and individuality leads to Lewis's final warning in this section of the text, and it is a trap we see constantly in modern society.
He warns that the devil always introduces destructive errors into the world in pairs of opposites. He doesn't just offer one bad option, he offers two that contradict each other.
Exactly. For example, he will introduce the extreme error of totalitarianism, the idea that you are nothing but a disposable cog in the collective machine. Your individuality is worthless, and everyone must be exactly the same.
But simultaneously, he introduces the opposite extreme error of individualism, the idea that you are a totally separate, sovereign dot who owes nothing to anyone else.
It's a psychological trap. He makes these two errors violently hate each other.
And he relies on the fact that your natural instinct when you see an ideology you find disgusting is to run away from it as fast as you can.
If you are terrified of totalitarianism, you sprint backward and blindly fall right off the cliff into selfish individualism.
The goal is simply to get you off the center path. Lewis advises that a Christian must keep their eyes fixed on the destination and walk straight down the middle.
Acknowledging that we are deeply connected, parts of a whole, yet irreducibly unique individuals.
Navigating that center path takes incredible self-awareness. And that brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Something beyond the paired errors we just discussed. If it is true that humanity is not a collection of isolated dots, but rather one massive interconnected human tree, how does that change your mundane interactions tomorrow?
Oh, that's good.
When a stranger cuts you off in traffic or a coworker genuinely wrongs you, your biological instinct is to view them as an enemy dot.
But if their branch is fundamentally connected to your branch in the shared root system of humanity, how does that change your reaction?
How do you treat a part of your own tree? It is something profound to mull over as you go about your week.
It is a paradigm-shifting question, and it perfectly encapsulates how this theology isn't just theory, it's meant to be lived.
It really is, and the good news is we are far from finished exploring this map. Just a quick heads up. There will be a new deep dive of this exact same book coming up next, where we will continue to trace Lewis's incredibly practical roadmap.
There is much more terrain to cover.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us and exploring these deep waters. Remember, you don't have to just stand on the beach and stare at the waves. You can grab the map and actually set sail. God blesses all the listeners. See you next time.